Okay, now we can look at the last part of the business analysis, planning and monitoring knowledge area. So the task that we'll look at first here is the planned business analysis information management. Now the purpose of this task is to develop an approach for how business analysis information will be stored and accessed. So this is all about thinking about upfront in the project, where will things be stored, what will be stored where, and how will people be able to access it. But let's have a look at the elements. So the elements of this particular task, firstly, is organization of business analysis information. The second element is level of abstraction. The third element is plan traceability approach. The fourth element is plan for requirements reuse, and then storage and access. Finally, we've got requirements attributes. Now for this particular task, in essence, it's about doing some pre-planning in terms of what information do we need to store, how will we share information, where will we store information, do we need to trace information, what approach will we be using, how abstract will information be? So again, what would be the level of information that we need to capture? Also, do we plan to reuse any of these requirements that we are collecting, or are we planning to find some sources for requirements to reuse into our initiative? So these are all the types of things around information management. So I'm not actually diving into these particular elements with you. I think you should go and read about this in your notes, but also read about this in the BABOK guide. However, I do want to just emphasize the very last element, the requirements attributes. So let's just run through those because they are in fact important for any requirements that you may be documenting. Okay, so let's now have a look at requirements attributes as a particular element and just run through all the different attributes that you need to consider when you document your requirements. So just to be clear, this is the information about requirements and it aids you in the ongoing management of the requirement through a change. So the first attribute is absolute reference. That is a primary identifier or a unique ID. The author, so who is composing the particular requirement, that will often be you if you are the one that authored a particular requirement. Complexity, so how complex will this be to implement? Ownership, who owns this requirement? So who needs this requirement and will potentially also be the sponsor or the owner of the requirement when it's been implemented? The priority, so what is the priority of this requirement relative to other requirements? The risks, are there any specific known risks that you need to link to this requirement that you're aware of? Source, this is often where did the requirement come from in the first place? So who asked for this requirement? You often need to go back to them when you need to change a particular requirement. Stability. This is all about how mature is this requirement? How well do we understand this requirement? And how fully is it developed? Status. This could be about the different statuses of requirements. And we don't all use the same statuses, but some might be, examples could be proposed, or it could be changed, or it could potentially be verified, validated, and so forth. You can look throughout the BABOK guide. They've got a lot of different statuses that they would associate with different status of requirements, states of requirements. So keep an eye out for that. And then the last one, urgency. How urgent is this requirement to be implemented for their stakeholder group? So how urgent do we really need this requirement to go live? So these are just really important attributes to understand. And I suggest that you think about some example requirements in your work at the moment and just run these attributes past that particular requirement and see how well you can answer it. This will help you to also understand the real-world scenario of using these particular attributes. All right, so these are the different attributes that you need to consider when you look at requirements, and always plan for them as part of your initial business analysis planning. All right, so let's move now to the very last task within the business analysis planning and monitoring knowledge area. So this is about identifying business analysis performance improvements. The purpose of this task is to assess the business analysis work and to plan to improve processes where required. So the elements that they've identified here for us, it's about doing some performance analysis, assess the measures that we've used, analyze the results we've gained, and recommend ideas or actions that we can take to improve. So if we just look at those elements again, and we look at the assessment measures, we can see that this is broken further down into accuracy and completeness, knowledge, effectiveness, organizational support, significance, strategic, and timeliness. These are the types of assessment measures that the BABOK proposes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you as a team decide to actually monitor that against any particular business analysis work. This is just the guide. Now, just to be perhaps a little bit open about this particular task, having been in a management role myself, having teams, it's not always the easiest particular task to perform. It's not very easy to measure business analysis work in a very quantitative way. It's a bit more intangible than that. So some of the methods that we've had to adhere to are things like getting customer feedback, stakeholder feedback, having some peer reviews, doing some feedback in that way. But it hasn't always been very easy to pinpoint where a particular requirement or a business analysis activity has been the reason why something may or may not have performed well or not well. So I would be very curious to know, how do you measure business analysis performance within your organization? What works, what doesn't work so well? I've been in fair systems and not such fair systems, so it would be a great discussion point. So on that note, this is the final video for business analysis planning and monitoring. So let's now, over to you, raise some questions in the Facebook group about this. Let's share some examples of how do you organize your information, what do you need to consider, or indeed look at some of the performance measurements for business analysis work within your team. It would be very interesting to hear what the rest of the world has done and what works and what doesn't work so well. And anything from an exam perspective that you think is important. Thank you. Right, I'll talk to you soon.